I welcome the effort of Cenk to engage with the keys and my analysis of the current political system. But his attack is based on a fundamentally flawed premise that we're two equally successful forecasters. That's wrong.
First of all, he says other people don't have
Go
any
respectfully get him.
well, you're talking to the wrong dude, brother. So, number one, I correctly predicted that Donald Trump would win in 2016.
I've got Trump at 279, 259.
He documented precisely one successful prediction, 2016. He also claimed without documentation that he successfully predicted 2012.
And I called Obama winning 6 weeks beforehand. I said, it's already over. Romney doesn't have a chance. And I was right about that.
I'll give him that. That's two.
Yeah, so I think that Alan is off to Alan Lichtman here is off to a good start because Cenk does not have the history that Alan has predicting elections. Like even if you got a couple right, and it's a coin flip, right? It's one or the other. Alan has he built that system using historical data from presidential elections. I don't know when he started, but for a very long time back, and he himself has predicted the last 10. So we're talking about who has the history. Allen wins that. He wins that easily.
Yeah, and I think with it comes down to the approach too. I think with Cenk, he's using polls, and I think other than that, it's more of a subjective analysis where you could call Allen's keys subjective, but at least there's a system and a structure to it, and he doesn't change with it. So that's where I think you're going to see a lot more subjectivity coming from Cenk rather than Lichtman, who's just going to stick to his keys. He's just I have a system. This is what I'm going to stick to.
Right.
2 compared to my 10 successful predictions. That's a 5-to-1 ratio. No comparability.
80% of Americans say that he is not mentally or cognitively healthy enough to be president.
That's not what the poll said. The poll said that those folks thought he was too old to run. It said nothing about his mental state. Go back to 1984, Ronald Reagan's reelection. At one point, 60% said Ronald Reagan was too old to run for reelection. He won one of the biggest landslides in U.S. history, winning all but one state and about 60% of the popular vote. He has no scientific.
Reagan won all but one state. That's something that I feel like, given how polarized we are today, it's just, I don't think that's possible without a significant cultural shift in our politics.
Yeah, I don't see that happening at all. I mean, right now, both of our parties are going to the extremes. So I think we're going to, in order for that to happen, we would have to be united in terms of policy, culture, things of that nature. We're the furthest that we can be. I don't, now we should be that way, but I don't foresee that happening for a while.
Yeah, today is I feel like, assuming, folks are Christian, even if Jesus came down on one side of the ballot, you're still going to have half the country.
Yep.
It's tough out here.
It's going to take an alien invasion or some third-party enemy in order to unite us, unfortunately, because we can't.
Third-party enemy we're not going to defeat, so hopefully we can figure something out on our own.
You're right. Right.
Model for predicting elections.
Yeah, some people do have a great track record, and it is based on not just the top polling numbers, but the underlying polling numbers and how they're doing in the campaign.
Polls are snapshots. They are not predictors. Those same polls led us to make incorrect predictions from the conventional wisdom about 2016. And look at 1988. In the late spring of that year, George H.W. Bush trailed his opponent, Mike Dukakis, by 17 points. All the pollsters and pundits counted him out, but according to the keys I wrote, he was a shoo-in to win because he's running on the record of the Reagan administration, and elections turn upon the strength and performance of the White House party. Bush won by nearly 8 points, a 25-point swing from the polls. He also claims to look at the campaigns and the candidates, but he's only looked at one side. His entire commentary was on the deficiencies of Joe Biden, but Joe Biden has to be compared with his competitor. That is Donald Trump. He admits that debates are irrelevant. They have no predictive value. Hillary Clinton won the debates and lost. John Kerry in 2004 won the debates and lost. But he says somehow, subjectively, this debate is different because it shows Joe Biden's cognitive decline.
Debates normally don't matter.
So so I had two thoughts during that last speech. One is I'm curious why the polls, especially like the polls that are like close to election day, like why they are off like so often wrong. I can understand in Trump's case, like maybe people were embarrassed to say they were Trump supporters the first time around. But generally speaking, I wonder why the polls are so incorrect.
And that's where, like, just a little forecasting with that video, Alan's going to speak about it. Like, he's like, he doesn't trust polls. He's like, he says religiously, polls are just snapshots of the moment. And I think, generally speaking, like, he's like, polls, like, they're not going to tell you the full story most of the time. And I think maybe like it all depends on who is presenting the polls. Like I know sometimes you'll have a Fox poll or you'll have a CNN, ABC poll, and now with the polarization in these media companies, it's hard to even trust a poll coming from MSNBC relative to a Fox, and it's just like who are you stating? What polls are you stating? And it's just like based on whoever's conducted that poll, you could have different results, and that's I think Alan's going to talk about that. It's just like the
Well,
fragility.
I wouldn't assume the pollsters have an agenda because, like, if you're taking a poll, normally it's because you want to know, the temperature, right? And being biased as a media source or like say a campaign, like if I'm on a Biden campaign, I don't want a biased poll that tells me what I want to hear. I want the real poll so I know what issues I'm losing on, what I'm winning on, where we're at,
Right.
if we're close or if we're far. So I think there is an incentive to be honest in polls in a way that there isn't in general media reporting. Now, maybe you don't talk about the polls with the values you don't like or something, but I think most people doing polls, in most cases, they want the real information.
I would imagine that they have an incentive, but it's just I would imagine that the people who are willing to take a Fox poll relative to an NBC poll, I would imagine like your audience that you're polling from. Now, if unless you're doing it in an unbiased way, which I would hope when you're conducting a poll that you're being as unbiased as possible. But like I would imagine if you were being solicited to do a Fox poll and you know it's Fox, then if you were on Fox for a general reason, you already got your candidate, and
Yeah,
it's
like
just
you're biased in the sample of people you're talking to.
right,
There's bias built in. Yeah,
right.
I could see that. I could see that for sure. And then what was the other thing I wanted to mention about this about why the polls are unpredictable? Okay, so this is the one weakness I'll say, and it's not even a for sure weakness. It's just a potential weakness because Allen does have a good track record. And I do respect the kind of scientific grounding and how he built up this model and these factors and uses them to make predictions and test them, I'm sure, all the way back through a bunch of different presidential elections.
Absolutely.
Um, but one thing I think is a weakness of that is if there is something truly new, I mean, it could be that the electorate has changed. It's not the same population as it was, while he was building his model, or if there's just something sufficiently unique. For instance, I think one of his keys is a scandal, right?
Yep.
And if
Yep.
we have all the scandals of the past to talk about, and that's just one key, right? But it's possible that there could be a scandal that's so big that it could be worth more than one key or something like that, right? Like there's just you think there's unique new things that could happen that could make his model potentially not relevant, right? So like maybe there's never been a lack of faith like this, or maybe there's never been a particular scandal of a certain level. So I think maybe when he says, I think his perspective is basically anything that's not in my model is completely irrelevant,
Relevant.
right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Whereas, like, is that necessarily true? Now, again, historically, he has a good track record, so I can't say that. But that's the only potential weakness is that he may be overly dismissive of anything that isn't explicitly in his model.
I agree wholeheartedly. I agree wholeheartedly, and I think like when I think about Alan Lichtman's model, I understand that there's no objectivity to it. So it's just like there's no there's no exact science. You're not going to be exact about these things, and I tend to agree with him sometimes on his own model, like as it relates to scandal. Just like you said, that the scandal key in particular, he only turns that key as it relates to corruption. And I think you have an example where Biden's age, where now he's been pushed out of the elections by his own party, where to me that is that could constitute a scandal. It's just like that is where it's just like I think he has. I understand the subjectivity of his keys, but I like how he put it. I like how he's consistent with it. But I do have some worries. Just like yes, there could be changes in information, there could be changes in events, to where your keys aren't even prepared for them. Just like the Constitution with abortion, it's just like there's just some things that you're not going to know to think about. And I do agree that there could be some room for error in that instance.